You shouldn't be tech savvy in order to feel safe while moving around on the internet. This is about quality standards as a government. So when we talk about the trusted web, the government has basically a twofold role. On one side, it's about setting the right example and show how you can be a trustworthy partner on the internet. And the other part is enforcing that trust becomes part of the internet's DNA.
Hey, my name is Sebastian van der Lans and I'm the founder of the company Wordproof, who recently won the Blockchains for Social Good competition from the European Commission. And our mission is to make trust part of the internet's DNA through blockchain technology, blockchain timestamps. And the aim is to build a trusted web where we all can feel safe and informed and secure. And joining me today is Wordproof's co-founder. It's Frank van Dalen. Frank has a very strong background in politics, technology, commercial processes, inclusivity and diversity. And it's truly a pleasure and honor to call myself your friend and to be working with you on such a regular basis. And a few days back, you were presenting on behalf of the Dutch government, with the Dutch government, for a big conference, a Switch conference in Singapore. How was that for you?
We got invited by the Dutch government to get involved in this conference in Singapore to talk about government trust and the internet. And obviously what you see right now is that there is more and more interest and attention for this really important topic, not only on this conference in Singapore, but also in Europe. There is like a lot of debate. How can we improve the levels of trust when it comes to the internet? So it was spot on. It was in the right moment, in the right environment. And it's really good to see that there's a lot of recognition from authorities to actually pay attention to it.
Can you take us on a journey on how governments can engage with a trusted web and what their role can be to create it?
Well, before we go into what governments can do when it comes to trusted web, we also have to understand the problem behind today's internet that we see. And when you look at the internet today, we see a lot of fraud. We see a lot of misinformation, fake news. We saw a lot of manipulation of content. And all of that is adding to this feeling of distrust when it comes to the internet. And when you look at the offline world, we've set a lot of rules and we built an infrastructure to ensure that people are living together in a trustworthy, safe environment. We have norms, how you interact with one another, that you don't steal, you don't walk into a shop and you steal stuff, just as an example. So we've created a lot of rules, laws, that define how we should interact with one another. And we created enforcement systems, the police, the military, Secret Service, to ensure that where people go off the rail, that correction can take place. And we even have a prison system in place or a fine system in place to enforce that people will follow the rules as we have set in society. And all of that is to create an environment, a society where people can live together in a non-confrontational way, where you can feel trusted, safe. We have to realize the internet in the end was built to connect computers. And what they did really very well, that if in the stream of computers, when information is sent over the internet, that when a computer breaks down, that this information package will find a different route. So it will come to the end point where it's supposed to go to. So they did include a couple of mechanisms to ensure that the internet is working in a proper way. But once you start realizing that the internet is basically a network of connectivity amongst people, it's not the computers that, I mean, obviously they are talking to one another, but it's the humans who are utilizing the computers that are utilizing the internet, that the internet is more about connecting people. And people have obnoxious behavior. I mean, they do steal, they do lie, they do manipulate, they have ego. And when you look at the design of the internet, all of this was not taken into account. And now when you look at the mass adoption that has taken place, I mean, almost every individual around the world in one way or the other is using the internet infrastructure. All this obnoxious behavior becomes part of the communication on the internet. So what is really needed when we talk about trust and the internet is that we have to start adding levels of trust to the internet infrastructure, to the DNA of the internet. And obviously, governments are trying to find ways to do that. So they make arrangements with big tech companies. And it is absolutely true. I mean, Facebook is trying to fight bullying. Twitter is trying to fight fake news. Google is trying to prevent death of intellectual property being presented on the internet. But in the end, this is not part of the DNA of the internet. This is something that a tech company can do or will not do. And it might not be enough to inject trust into the internet. So what you see now is that governments are starting to step up. They're like, okay, this voluntary way of improving the trust levels around the internet is not achieved if we just leave it up to the tech companies. And then, of course, you can say, well, one way of doing that is create an alternative for Facebook that will have a more trusted way of dealing with social interactions. You can even build a new Google, but then you create new silos on top of this internet infrastructure that is still not added to the infrastructure of the internet itself. So we have to make steps, and it's becoming urgent. 86 people, for example, have been impacted in a negative way by fake news. And what happens because of that, because people feel threatened, people feel insecure, they don't feel trust. So you now see that 14% of the people who are active on the internet are actually starting to use fake ideas, false information when they need to give information in order to process what they want to do on the internet. And obviously what they're actually doing is they're adding to the distrust of the internet. We see that even though online economy is growing rapidly, there's also a group of people, 12%, who feel insecure in doing purchases online because they don't feel secured. And obviously, when you go to a giant, you feel like, well, this brand is really known, so I feel kind of comfortable to buy something online. But if you then go to the local web shop, you might feel like, I can't find that many reviews, I'm not so sure, I don't feel protected, I don't trust it, so I better not buy. But yeah, that is hindering the economic development of small entrepreneurs in an online environment, or entrepreneurs coming from other parts of the world. So it's hampering economic development in a certain way. And you even see that there's a portion of the people who do not want to use the internet. And this is particularly problematic for governments because they are trying to build some kind of an e-governing environment where a lot of government services are brought to the online world. But if then 10% of the population is like rejecting this move or feel insecure, you still need to ensure that you have an offline infrastructure in place that is able to service those people when it comes to passports. That if I need a new passport or a driving license, I have to go to the municipality building, or I do it online. But if I don't want to do it online, I have to go to that building, and that building needs to be maintained. The government has a monopoly position in many services that are government related. So if a part of the population is like, I'm rejecting this online e-government services system, well, that's going to be very costly, or the service levels will be very low towards those who still tap in on the offline world. So this whole idea of the shift that governments are trying to make, to shift from an offline service to online government services, it is having distrust in the internet is really, really problematic because you need 100% adoption. And we can see that, for example, when it comes to government communication, it's the same thing. If I read something coming from a government and I don't feel secure, I don't trust it really, then I might actually not be willing to adopt the information that's presented to me. And this could be a problem when it comes to, well, the pandemic that we're in right now, information about COVID, information about vaccination programs, information about energy transition, where we want to create a more sustainable world. Every part is a government policy, but the information presented online is not adopted because the distrust that people might feel, or the anxiety that people might feel like, I'm not so sure if I want to believe what I see, or is this really coming from the government that it says it's coming from? So when you talk about mistrust on the internet, it will reduce the impact of government communication in general. It will erode support for government policies. It can even contribute to conspiracy theories. And you might actually even see social unrest popping up. So distrust in the internet, where the government is active in the online world, can have real consequences that can hinder or even hurt society. So when we talk about the trusted web, the government has basically a two-folded role. On one side, it's about setting the right example and show how you can be a trustworthy partner on the internet. And the other part is that has more to do with legislation, enforcing that trust becomes part of the internet's DNA. So when we talk about the role of the government as an entity that's going to set examples, what you then want to do is, if I go online, I want to see and to recognize that the information that I see is actually coming from the government. How can I, for myself, prove that it is coming from the legit source that it says to be? That's one. Secondly, if I look at some information today and I look at again at it tomorrow and there has been a little change, then I might feel uncomfortable. I'm like, wait a moment, wasn't it a little bit different yesterday? So I want to see the change to be made transparent, because transparency will add to the understanding what has changed and will add to the trust. And the third thing, I want to be 100% sure that the information that's presented to me is not being tampered with, that what I see was actually meant to be as it is when I see it on in the online world. So there are three components to it. It's first, is the source who it is supposed to be? Like, is it really the government source? What are changes? Are they made transparent? And is there indisputable proof that the content is not being tampered with? And obviously, what is really helpful is using the blockchain technology for that, that when you create hashes around content being published on the internet, and you place the hashes into the blockchain, that contributes a lot to this feeling of it's real, I can see what has changed, and it is legit.
Yeah.
And this will add to this feeling of trustworthiness of government communication. And with that, also less people rejecting what they see coming from the government. And I think this is not about a business case behind timestamping. This is about quality standards as a government. I mean, as a government, you have quality standards that you're trying to follow. And indisputable proof that you are who you say you are, that is just a level of a quality standard that should be adopted by every single government around the world, even more than companies and publishers and so forth, because they are addressing every individual in the population and adding as a, not only by leading by example, but building trust around government communication is really important.
And they have to cover, that's what you said, they have to cover not only their target audience, but 100%. That makes this such a unique use case. There is no 90% coverage. It must be 100%.
Absolutely. Otherwise, your policies are going to fail. And then we have the second part, that's more about regulations. And we have seen, like what I mentioned before, we have seen initiatives from Facebook and Twitter and Google and all other tech giants. Tech companies are trying to kind of do their best, but we have to understand that in the end, it is hurting their business model. And they have shareholders to service. They don't have a society to service. They don't have individuals to service. In the end, they have to service their shareholders. So it's about shareholders' value. And of course, a lot of things, good things they have done are done because of pressure by either authorities or societal pressure, but it's not good enough. So I think it is about time that governments are stepping in. What we saw when the internet came to life, it was kind of the Wild West. Then authorities put a lot of attention on data and privacy security. And now you see more talk about trust. And I mean, this is really important. If content is being brought to the internet and it's going viral, I think it's a very legit rule to say, like, then I want to be able to see who the source is. We're not talking about what the source is communicating. That's the freedom of speech. But what we see now is we see a lot of information going viral without even being able to identify the source. And because of that, we are not able to keep people accountable for what they are trying to spread. So personally, I think what would be a very good rule coming from a government saying, like, listen, if there is no identity connected to a message, fine, publish it on your Facebook or wherever you want to publish it, but it will not go viral. And that is then the question arises, because that's what tech giants say, like, yeah, but how do we do that? I'm like, well, timestamping again, a timestamp connected to an identity is a very easy way to enforce it. Then you are adding trust to the DNA of the internet. This is not about a tech company doing something. This is a fundamental approach how information should be handled, floating through the internet, and with or without viral context.
Yeah, what we came up with talking and working on this is kind of a framework. So we have the unregulated internet, then Europe had the great intention with GDPR. Not everybody on the internet likes GDPR. The execution could be more beautiful, but the intention was wonderful. Better rights on your data for citizens, starting with Europe. So from the unregulated, we went to a GDPR internet, and the trusted web is really an evolution of the internet. It could say, hey, you have the unregulated internet, then you have GDPR with better rights for their own data for the citizens, and then you have a trusted web where all information that reaches you must be transparent and accountable. That's a logical next step after the intentions behind GDPR, isn't it?
It is, and we just talked about. I just talked about the accountability, but on the other hand, we also have transparency. And when it comes to transparency, I mean, if I run into information on the internet, I want to be able to see, has it been tampered with, or has it just been changed in a legit way? Because sometimes we correct mistakes, nothing wrong with it, but sometimes it's fraudulent. I want to be able to assess it. And a very nice example is when it comes to fraudulent advertisements. Tech companies just keep saying, like, it's impossible to get rid of them all. But people are actually losing money because of it. Their money gets being stolen. So this is something that the government should not allow. The government is there to protect and safeguard its citizens, also in the online world. And of course you can say, like, well, it's not allowed. But what do you do when tech giants say, like, yeah, well, we try to do our best, but we can't really solve it? Well, if you use timestamps and the blockchain, and you have, like, on one side the model in the advertisement, on the other side the agency, and they both timestamp the legit advertisement, it's a very easy regulation to say, like, only advertisement that is timestamped in such a construct can be published on websites, online media, and so forth. So there are easy ways to do it, but you have to look at it from a more fundamental point of view and start injecting the trust into the DNA of the internet, and not leave it up to a tech company to say, like, well, we created a help desk and we have some evaluators taking care of this problem, because technology needs to be put in place to support the ambition of a government to also create a safe environment online. So coming back to this whole government thing and the trusted web, it's leading by example. So ensuring that every piece of information that is broadcast on behalf of the government, and this can be schools, this can be water boards, this can be court houses, every entity that is created to service the public interest, that they show that they are indeed the owner of the information. They give the individual a possibility to check that the information has not been tampered with. And this could be like a document coming from a government that I use in a private deal buying a house from someone. that is used. Well, this is a government document. You're allowed to make extensions to your house. Look at this document. How can I identify that this document is legit? So this is where timestamping comes in place to ensure that what's coming from the government is secured. And then the second rule, and that all reflects on accountability and transparency, identify a couple of mechanisms, rules, norms, as we have them in the offline society, to start injecting trust and trustworthiness into the DNA of the internet. And this is more fundamental than asking a tech company to please double check something. So there's a big task ahead for the government.
What you're saying there is very, very fundamental. So through those timestamps, and it's really an open source way, so there's no trust involved in the government, there's no trust involved in Wordproof as a company. It's really an open source way to bring that transparency, to bring that accountability in the base layer of the internet, so that there can be regulations around how algorithms should handle it. May it spread? Okay, only if there's a sender who takes accountability for that information. So there's a whole infrastructure based on what policymakers can do, what's necessary to make a safe and inclusive place of the internet. And secondly, that's what you're saying there, is the government must lead by example.
Yeah, and also when it comes to leading by example, it's not like because oh, we're just going to set an example and hopefully others will follow. But there is real interest for the government, because for the government, it is, if people don't trust what they find on the internet, like what I said, it will reduce the impact of government communication. It will erode government's support for government actions. It will increase conspiracy theories. It might even end up with social unrest in society. Uproar, even not per se by going on the streets, but just by anger in society. So it's not only leading by example, but it's actually something government should do to increase the levels of trust and quality of their communication, because it is ensuring that society functions in a decent way and people are protected.
It's such a holistic story. And last week I had a chat with Joost de Valk, who's involved in the Trusted Web movement as well. And that talk was on search engines rewarding those transparency and accountability. The more transparency, the higher you rank. The more accountability a sender takes, the higher you rank. Through an infrastructure in this way, regulators can actually enforce this from the search engines, enforce this from the social media, to make sure that the inclusive and therefore safe internet arises.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I mean, we have those norms set and build a whole infrastructure to enforce it in the offline world. So you shouldn't be tech savvy in order to feel safe and know what's happening around you while moving around on the internet. I mean, this is about the population as a whole. Earlier this year, 2020, governments had a lot of trouble, and also the social media and the search engine had a lot of trouble in distinguishing authentic COVID-19 information and fake news COVID information. And what you saw at some point, everything that was related to COVID, there was in the beginning this message, go to the World Health Organization website, please. So that is where tech companies took responsibility. Then they figured it out that, okay, there is also those institutions on national level. So they started adding them. Then you have also the local branches of those national institutions. With this, you already see the struggles with legit from not legit, from authentic authorities, from non-authentic authorities, from governments, non-governments. That is in itself was the battle. And we talk about a global pandemic. And we were struggling. Governments were struggling. Social media and search engine platforms were struggling. And in the end, the population is struggling because I have a real concern. And what are the rules that I should follow? What is the real information? I want to be informed, but I'm just not sure that what I see is actually real. We have to solve this problem, because this is true for many cases that are not like a global pandemic, but still taps in on this feeling of insecurity. And if people then decide not to adopt what they see, not to embrace what they see, not to follow up on what they see, then a lot of policies will just fail.
So there's an infrastructure, there's lots of reasons for governments to adopt it. You started working on the policy side of the thing, and this quickly exploded. We are about to start a whole team for working with governments. Who's likely to adopt? Is it the small local governments, or is it the whole countries or whole continents? What's your take on that?
I mean, we are now talking to some local governments, and they said very specifically, it's not about the business case as such. It's really about us setting quality standards to our population so they can feel ensured and trusted with what we give to them and show them. But I think if you as a government, whether you're local, regional, national, international, doesn't matter, global, and you want your policy programs to succeed, your communication has to be trusted. And what we do see, there is a big chunk of people on the internet, they just don't trust it. They feel insecure. They feel anxiety. And when that is in play, then that's hindering the transfer of communication and information. And governments have to solve it. So I think in the years to come, those who want to succeed as a government body, they will start embracing. They have to.
Can you do run us quickly through the use case from that local government? Because it's a really special one. It's so specific.
Yeah, about a Dutch municipality. I mean, as an individual, you can ask for information from the government, coming from the government. So the government makes all kinds of decisions, and you can ask for the documents behind those decisions. And what they said is, we want to give people the like, if we transfer information, we want it to be timestamped, so it's exactly known what has been sent out. And actually, it works two ways. If sometimes that information is being used in court cases against the government, and then of course documents are brought into the court case, but how does the lawyer of, in this case, the government, know that what is actually brought into the government into this law case, that it's actually legit and not tampered with? That's difficult. I mean, they have had cases where they found out that documentation was tampered with. At the same time, if I take down information from the government and I'm going to do a transaction with another private individual, handing over additional documentations, for example, permits, that there has been a debate in the local council that we want to develop a certain area in a certain way. Okay, if I'm going to do this transaction with you, how do I know that this document is actually legit? And of course, I can go back to the municipality, say like, listen, can you find it out? And they will start digging into it, but it's very costly, time consuming. They might not be able to find it on the spot while you need it. So what's easy that you just like, oh, it's a timestamp document. I run it through the timestamp engine. Oh yeah, it says green light. It's legit. Oh, wait a moment, there's a red light. Something is wrong. So I'm not going to close this deal until I have figured out that what you gave me is actually legit. So there's efficiency on the side of the government, and it's protecting the government in court cases. And on the other side, it's creating additional trust and security for those who need those documents in transactional procedures with other individuals. And this is only about this very specific, very small part of transfer of information based on open public data kind of thing. So that's the case.
Such an amazing use case. It's so powerful. It's such powerful. I can't wait to see this one in action, and that will happen soon. It will happen so soon.
Likely early 21. It's already happening. Yeah.
Amazing. And what continent? Wordproof started in the Netherlands, but it's really a global community. What continent or where is the saving of the internet likely coming from, and who's to adopt this first? Would it come from Europe or the US or Canada or Asia?
Well, I mean, we have seen some traction coming from Asia, from Canada, but also in this case, the Netherlands, Germany. So it's kind of a global, but I think that just like with the GDPR, the data and privacy regulations, that Europe will be on the forefront of this. Trust and the internet is perceived by Europe as extremely important, because Europe as no other understands that the more we move into an online society, we have to transfer the trust levels and the trust mechanisms from the offline world into the online world. And that means changing the technical DNA of the internet where it's needed, and not relying on the silos built on top of the internet, because then a lot of stuff can still go wrong. Then it's also not adopted by society as a whole. So I think Europe will be in the forefront and set examples that will be adopted by the rest of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And if we see, one of the big things in Europe is creating a level playing field. How does a trusted web contribute to a level playing field, for example, between small and large players on the internet?
For example, the moment you publish something on the internet and there's a scrape tool searching your website and your e-commerce environment and scraping your really nice content, publishing it on their own websites, before Google has even identified that you had done it, you will lose your advantage. So even though you put all your effort in it, you put all your money into it, your intellectual thinking, others might benefit from it. So that's a really big problem. And it's really kind of bizarre that Google is still not able to solve that problem. But with timestamping, it becomes set in stone, like, no, but you were the first. And we have to find ways that small matters again. That when I go to a small web shop, I am ensured that there are mechanisms, fundamental mechanisms at play, that I will be protected, that I will not be attacked by fraudulent behavior when buying stuff. Because if we don't solve the problem, we can only deal with tech giants, the Amazons, the eBays. What about the small web shop around the corner? This whole infrastructure of trust also will start servicing the small entrepreneurs. And in the end, those are the backbones of a society. The small entrepreneurs, when you take them out, society will collapse. So governments need to step up here.
And governments think so, but also, and that's what I learned from the conversation with Joost, Google thinks the same. If there's not a level playing field, if Google isn't able to give a stage to the small companies, then only Amazon will be left over, Amazon and Bol.com. Google wants a level playing field, because if there's only 3 players, they have no search results, they have no advertisers.
Yeah, I mean, if I know that if I Google and I will know, like, oh, those are the 10 companies that will be showcased to me over and over and over again, then I lose interest in Google. So it is hurting the business model of Google, obviously. But the thing is, this is not something that Google should solve, because Google is, again, a silo on top of the internet. This is about a global addition to the internet, injecting trust into the DNA of the internet, where Google can benefit from as well, either be it voluntary or enforced by regulations set by the regulators and the governments. But Google should be just one of the many that should benefit and can benefit from a layer of trust over the internet.
Yeah, and the timing is so, this year, Horizon 2020 ended. What you see in the new Horizon Europe is trust is really one of the core elements of the new Horizon program.
Privacy and data protection were main topics in the last few years, but now you see a massive increase of interest in trust, because people do see it, and luckily also governments and policymakers do see it as like one of the big challenges of today's policies when it comes to online world. The problem is everyone is struggling, but how to do it? And I'm like, well, give us a call. I mean, and it is open source, so it is available for everyone, but there are solutions. There are solutions. There's a way to do it, but don't wait for the tech companies to endorse it, because it will also hinder their economic value. And therefore, authorities, governments, the European Union have to take leadership in this one and to take responsibility.
Yeah, perfect. And let's wrap it up here. So what did we see? There's an open source solution to really make trust part of the DNA of the internet. It's available now. There's use cases from governments in the beginning of 2021. And truly true open source, which I believe is the only way to achieve a trustworthy and more truthful internet where all can verify the information that matter. It's such an exciting time. We're at the start of a revolution, I really think. And is there anything you want to add before we wrap up the interview?
No, let's just hope that the anxiety and the distrust that people feel when going online, we have to decrease those levels of distrust and anxiety. And well, that's Wordproof's mission, isn't it?
Absolutely. So yeah, let's wrap it up here. Thanks for making the time. It's such a holistic story. It's a timestamp the adoption in society through the search engines, through social media, through governance. It's really an exciting time. Thanks for being here, Frank, and thanks for joining.
You're welcome.